Hello, I'm Dr. Cara Pierce, and I'm one of the veterinarians at the Wildlife Center of Virginia. I'm going to be presenting on helping the helper and building a community. This presentation is really important because as rehabbers and animal caregivers, it can be really overwhelming. So I'm just trying to help you guys develop some strategies for dealing with that so you are as successful as possible. So, the first thing I want to talk about is have you consider why you're here. Why are you taking this course with us today? It could be because you're a compassionate person. Certainly, this field, animal care, and especially wildlife rehabilitation, draws compassionate people. It could be you want to help mitigate some of the effects that human activity has on wild animals. Maybe you just want to make a difference. Maybe you want to help others. Maybe you just really love animals. Maybe you're an extremely empathetic person and are looking for an outlet for that empathy. And most importantly, probably you're here for the fame and fortune. So the veterinary medical field and just animal caregivers in general, and caregivers in general in any profession, really attracts individuals who demonstrate a high level of compassion, empathy, and a drive to care for others. Well, this high level of compassion and empathy and a drive to care for others can be really beneficial in this field. This can also be a huge problem. And this is where we need to talk about compassion fatigue. So, compassion fatigue is a state experienced by those who help people or animals in distress. It is basically an extreme state of tension or preoccupation with the suffering of those that you're trying to help. This suffering of others and your patients can end up causing trauma and stress for you. Compassion fatigue is a huge problem for all caregivers, honestly, and when it happens the most is when the caregivers don't practice self-care themselves. Compassion fatigue could manifest as disruptive behavior, apathy, so not feeling passionate about what you previously felt passionate about, isolation, so removing yourself, withdrawing from friends and family, substance abuse, whether that be drugs or alcohol, mental and physical fatigue, as well as compulsive behaviors that you didn't previously have. So something that goes along with compassion fatigue is burnout. And actually last year, the World Health Organization identified burnout as a medical condition that we should be monitoring for in our caregivers. So, burnout is a syndrome that results from chronic stress that is not being successfully managed. So, this can result with feeling depleted, feeling exhausted, distancing yourself mentally from your job or task, feeling negative or cynical with regards to what you're doing, and overall, this actually reduces your efficiency. So what we need to talk about is how do we avoid compassion fatigue and how do we avoid burnout? And really the biggest thing is building resiliency to these issues. It sounds cliche and, like a bubble bath will make everything better. That's not the case, obviously, but doing basic things like getting enough sleep, eating well, regular physical activity, and engaging in active relaxation activities such as yoga, meditation, or honestly, whatever works for you, whatever you find relaxing, can help you build resiliency so that when you are facing situations like burnout and compassion fatigue, you're going to be less likely to go down that path. Another way to build resiliency or prevent yourself from running into situations such as compassion fatigue and burnout is to set boundaries. This can be really hard for people who work in this industry because we're all here because we want to help people and help animals, and it's very hard to say no for all of us. So a few key ways you can set boundaries. You need to set limits and stick to them. You need to make your self-care a priority. You need to practice self-awareness so that you know when you're not okay. You need to be assertive and be able to tell others, no, I cannot do that. No, I cannot help you. No, I cannot take that additional animal. And then also start small. If this is something you're struggling with, pick one of these tasks and focus on improving that. And then maybe next month, pick a different one and focus on improving that. This quote here I think is pretty powerful, and one of our veterinarians at the Wildlife Center makes a habit of yearly printing this out and giving it to each new staff member to put beside their computer, and that is, remember, you cannot pour from an empty cup. The moral of this is to take care of yourself first and foremost. If your cup is empty, you have nothing else to give to others and give to the animals you're trying to care for. So, going into wildlife rehabilitation can be a huge time commitment, and I think we should all have some pretty basic concerns when we're jumping into this field and things we need to think about before we go down this path. So, what happens if you need to take a vacation? What if your best friend is getting married and you really want to go? What happens if you fall ill? What happens if your power goes out? What happens if you just need a break? You can't do it anymore. What happens if you're at capacity and there's 10 more squirrels sitting on your doorstep? These are all things you need to think about before getting into wildlife rehabilitation and build a plan for dealing with each of these issues. In doing that, you can really prepare yourself and ideally prevent compassion fatigue and burnout. So, having a plan and a support network of other rehabbers and animal care professionals can help you with all of these problems. But where do you start? It's really overwhelming to know where to begin. For starters, I would recommend getting to know your local resources and meeting your neighbors. There's a website called Animal Help Now. They also have an app that will direct you to the closest open wildlife rehabilitator. Take a look at that, learn who's nearby, learn who does what, and see if you can collaborate with anyone in your area. Some state wildlife agencies maintain a list of active wildlife rehabilitators, and also sometimes people who are no longer rehabilitating wildlife. Looking to them can be a really, really good way to learn who's in your area and what species they do to see if they could be any help to you at any point in time. Humane societies or animal control officers may know local rehabbers, so talking to them, you can find out who they're bringing the animals to, and see if they know anyone they could put you in contact with. And ultimately, figure out who is close by, learn from them, collaborate with them, help them, and also let them help you. There's also many social media groups these days for rehabbers on Facebook, national, local, state groups, where people can collaborate online, and that's another really good way to meet who is nearby. Another really great reason to know your local resources is to help transfer animals amongst the community. So, for example, if there's a rehabber in your area who's an excellent raptor rehabilitator and you don't have a flight cage, you're going to want to know about that so you can divert calls about raptors or transfer raptors that come through your front door to that center. And you may be able to help that center in return by taking on some of its healthy orphan mammals if that's something you specialize in. And then on a national level, the National Wildlife Rehabilitators Association, or the NWRA, and the International Wildlife Rehabilitation Council, or the IWRC, have many resources on their website with regards to networking, so that is always a good resource as well. Another option is the Wildlife Center of Virginia. We're certainly always here and are happy to provide help in whatever way we can. If you're going to be starting wildlife rehabilitation, professional development and networking is going to be really, really, really important for you. A lot of the time, you're working on your own with these animals. You don't have someone to collaborate with. And going to conferences and meeting other people can help your mental health and also help to improve the standard of care that you're providing to these animals. So there's many large and small scale conferences that are really, really good opportunities to learn, practice skills, as well as network with other rehabilitators. Some of the big ones that come to mind would be the NWRA Symposium, which is yearly in February. The Wildlife Center of Virginia hosts a Call of the Wild conference every year in November. And then New York State also has a really excellent wildlife rehabilitation seminar that is put on yearly. So building a network of rehabbers and people who can help you find someone to care for your patients if you cannot care for them or you need to go away. Also, though, meeting other people can give you the opportunity to help someone who might need help when they need to go away. Also, this network can maybe give you access to resources. Maybe there's a rehabber an hour from you who has a really good relationship with a local hospital who donates supplies to them that they can also pass on to you. Collaborating with other rehabbers can also really improve your overall patient care and success. It's important to remember when working with other wildlife rehabilitators and other wildlife professionals to respect their knowledge and their abilities. So I really encourage you to not talk poorly of other rehabilitators and avoid judging them for their rehab practices. We're all doing the best we can with the resources we have. It's important to work on helping each other grow rather than criticizing each other. So now on to some things you should do. Certainly meet other rehabbers in your area. Realize that you have a common goal, helping wildlife. Ultimately, we all want the same thing at the end of the day. Definitely support each other, learn from each other, and work together. Your efforts are amplified when you work together. Now we need to talk a bit more about setting boundaries and how to accomplish that more specifically. If you're going to get into wildlife rehabilitation, you're going to need to set a limit for how many animals you can care for with the resources that you have available to you at that time, and you need to remember that you are also a resource. Don't stray from this limit. It's better to help 10 animals well than help 20 poorly. And also consider setting limits for what you can rehabilitate. Consider the age of the animal, the injury, and the amount of care required. This is going to be something that is very individual, unfortunately. So, some people who are retired might be able to rehabilitate those tiny neonate mammals that need to be fed every 2 hours, whereas someone who has a full-time job might be able to only rehabilitate cottontails that need to be fed twice a day. When it comes to talking about boundaries, the waters get a little muddy when it comes to home rehabbers. It's certainly harder to set a boundary and step away when the patients are in your home. In order to work with this and still have a good quality of life and avoid compassion fatigue and burnout, if you're a home rehabber, it's really important that you have a designated animal space and a non-animal space. These spaces need to be physically separate in your home, but also mentally separate. That when you leave that animal space, you're going back to your normal life and doing your normal life things, and you're not an animal caregiver in that moment. Also, if you're a home rehabber, just resist the urge to check on your patients obsessively. You stressing about them is not going to make them any better. Another thing to consider is when to ask for help. If you're new to wildlife rehabilitation, rehabilitating wildlife on your own, or even a really experienced wildlife rehabilitator, these are all times that you might need to reach out to someone to ask for help. If an animal is not improving despite your treatment or worsening, if an animal has a condition you've just never seen before, if you're concerned the animal might not be releasable but need a second opinion, or honestly, if you just feel overwhelmed by a case, it is not wrong to reach out to a veterinarian, a rehabber, or someone who's an expert in that species for their opinion. This community is really, really collaborative, and we really like to help each other succeed. So when you're faced with a particularly difficult case or a difficult situation, who do you ask for help? For the medical side of it, certainly veterinarians can be a really good resource. Your own veterinarian or one that works with wildlife specifically are both great options. You'd be surprised the number of local veterinarians that do have an interest in working with wildlife. They just don't know where to start or how to get into that. Another really good resource are larger wildlife rehabilitation centers, such as the Wildlife Center of Virginia. These people are generally very receptive to helping you with cases or troubleshoot rehabilitation problems you're having. It's also great just to collaborate and consult with other rehabbers in the area. Maybe they've seen a case like this before. Maybe they can take 3 of your squirrels to make your life a little bit easier. And then also just rehabbers with experience in the species you're working with. Experts are very keen to share their knowledge, and with today's technology, really you can collaborate with people from all across the world. Whenever reaching out to other centers or veterinarians for help with a case, you need to be prepared to present the case and the information to them. Questions they're going to be asking you: how long have you had the animal? Why did it come into care? What are your physical exam findings? What treatments have you tried? Ideally, if you can take a picture or video to send along, and even more ideally, if you can send along the entire medical record or any diagnostics that have been done. This will really help whoever is looking at that case evaluate what's going on and make it easier for them to help you. All this contextual information is really important for diagnosing any problems and can help the person who's trying to help you better. By deciding to rehabilitate wildlife, you are unfortunately going to have to deal with euthanasia. And it's important to remember that euthanasia means good death. Sometimes ending animal suffering can be the kindest thing we can do for that animal, and it's really important to remember that it doesn't mean we have failed or done anything wrong. By deciding to rehabilitate wildlife, you will also unfortunately have to deal with death. And for me, it's really important for you all to understand that just by an animal coming into care at a wildlife rehabilitation center, that patient has a worse prognosis than its wild sibling. It could be injured and that's why it's come in. It could have been abandoned due to any sort of underlying illness that we are not yet aware of. And also, it's really important to realize that accidents and mistakes happen in captivity that can lead to death. It's important to think that without you, this patient would have had a 0% chance of survival from the start. In order to cope with the amount of death we see in wildlife rehabilitation, it's really important to learn from your mistakes, celebrate your successes. Some people find it helpful to develop a ritual. Consider practicing new techniques and skills on deceased patients so that you can learn from that patient and advance care for other patients. One of the most important parts of preventing compassion fatigue and burnout is developing a going home checklist or a going home ritual. This will really help you separate your rehabilitation life from the remainder of your life. And this is even important if you are a home rehabber. You can follow these steps when you leave the animal area of your house and go back to the rest of your house for the day. This checklist here was recently published by the International Wildlife Rehabilitation Council, and I think it's a really great tool for rehabbers. So whenever you're ready to go home or finish up your wildlife work for the day, it's important to start by taking a few minutes to just go over your day and reflect on how that went for you. When doing this, you need to acknowledge your successes, but also your challenges. If you're working at a center where there's others or you're collaborating with local rehabbers, it's important to check on those colleagues. Small acts of appreciation can be very powerful for those people. Next, think about how are you doing? If you experienced a difficult day, think about it and let it go. Leave it all behind. This one I think is very important for rehabbers. Remember that no matter what, you made a positive impact in at least one animal's life today, and that's pretty cool. Transition, go home, relax, rest. Focus on having a deliberate transition from your work or rehab life to your non-work or non-rehab life. Go do whatever gives you joy. You certainly deserve it. And then it's important to check in with yourself and just make sure you are doing okay. Here are some different resources. So the American Veterinary Medical Association has a quality of life assessment that you can do to assess your personal well-being. There is a really great website on compassion fatigue here, as well as being compassionate to yourself. And then here are some books that you might consider reading if you are struggling with any of these issues. Hopefully this presentation made it very apparent that caring for yourself is one of the most important parts of being a wildlife rehabilitator. Also, that it's really important to build a network and build a community to support you, as well as to celebrate the successes.